I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Mazda CX-3, a car that, if you live here in Australia, will be very familiar to you because this is by far the most popular vehicle in what's known in Australia as the light SUV class, which is really just very small SUVs. The CX-3 accounts for most of the volume in this space, and for a good reason. It still looks good, even though this design is now a few years old. It's got a punchy engine, the interior is pretty comfortable, and as a car to drive, it's actually remarkably athletic and agile. But not everything is holding up quite so well as the years roll on for the CX-3. And that's what we'll be looking at in today's video. Is it still the right, very small SUV to buy, or are newer competitors like the Skoda Kamiq, the Volkswagen T-Cross, and the Ford Puma a better bet with their more modern sets of technology? As I mentioned, I think this look is in fact holding up. This one is a bit special. This is an eternal blue Akari, so it's got all of the sort of glitzy features outside, including bigger wheels and a sunroof. But largely, the CX-3 pretty much looks the same no matter which model you go for. That's also true of the interior, which now comes with basically everything you see up here as standard. There was a time when it got just a dinky little radio up here on the dash. That's been ditched because all models needed to have a reversing camera and some level of infotainment with a decent screen. So now every CX-3 you buy comes with this 7-inch screen up here. It is a touchscreen when the car is stopped. If it's moving, you control it with this rotary dial. Now the basic functions of the screen are fair enough. You've got digital radio, you've got navigation, you've got wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It's just that the integrated software is really dated now. It looks 10 years old. The maps look quite immature and old-fashioned. So, I would expect that the next generation CX-3 will pick up infotainment that's similar to what's now in the Mazda 3 and the CX-30, which is one size bigger than this car. Either way though, it works. Steering wheel, really nice wheel, same wheel as you get in an MX-5, feels good in the hand, leather wrapped. And then we look onto Mazda's old style gauge cluster. It's fine. You've got basic trip computer functions, you've got a digital speedo, that's about it. The only analog dial in there is for the tacho, and that gives you some sense that this thing has a bit of a sporty engine to it. It actually shares an engine with the MX-5, Mazda's 2-litre Skyactiv G engine, and it's a bit of a goer, but we'll come back to how this car drives later. Now, if you do spend more money on a CX-3 on a grade like this Akari, you do step up to some semi-premium features. So we have leather appointed seats here in this car that are actually quite plush and comfortable. We have electric adjustment for the driver, and in fact memory for the driver too, with 2 positions, which would make this car good for couples, plus heating for the front seats. Got this nice suede lining up here on the dash, and also the inserts to the doors, which looks and feels quite expensive. The rest of the materials about the place are a bit cheaper. Oh, I thought this was going to be scratchy, but actually it does have a soft pad where your leg rests, which is a nice feature. We also get this sunroof here in the Akari, plus some decent storage. We get an armrest, though it isn't actually standard across the range. You can add it as an accessory to the base cars though. So we've got a bit of covered storage there. We have some open storage ahead of the shifter with 2 USB ports, and the door bins can take a water bottle. So up front, I think it is holding up decently. It's just that the technology is now starting to feel a little bit dated, though if you use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, you won't really notice. Let's check out the back seats. Now the CX-3 is really a cladded hatchback, isn't it? Obviously with such limited ground clearance, you're not going to be going too far off-road, but it does kind of have that chunky boy look to it, which has clearly worked with a lot of Australians because it continues to be a very popular vehicle. That being said, the CX-3 is really a car for couples sitting up front, maybe a pet here in the back, very small children, or more likely a gym bag because, it's not spacious. For myself, it's 6 foot. I've got just enough headroom. In fact, it's actually quite livable, but my legs are jammed up against the back of the seat in my own driving position. Toe room's fine though. At an absolute pinch, you could get someone in the middle, but there's basically no space for their legs. You do get some amenities. We have a flip down armrest here with cup holders. So, you could kind of use it for a road trip, I guess, but you'd probably look to a friend with a bigger car. Those suede inserts come back for the doors here. No air vents though, which makes it hard to use the back seats in summer. And much like up front, we have hard materials here on the top of the doors. So, you do get a modicum of practicality with the CX-3, that's for sure. But Mazda can sell you the CX-30, the CX-5, the CX-8, or the CX-9 if you want a bigger SUV. Or the Mazda 6 wagon. Heading around the back of the CX-3, personally I think it wears eternal blue quite well. I like the color. Machine grey also looks good on this car, I think. Now, there's no electric tailgate offered on the CX-3. It's fine, this is not high up. I think anyone could do this. Boot space though is really small for the class. Almost every other vehicle in this class offers more outright cargo space, but you will get probably one large suitcase in there, and then you could stack some stuff on top of it. As you can see, we have our bags here in the boot. You know, we fit our camera stuff. That is about it. You can fold down those back seats if you need more space though, and underneath this boot floor, there is actually a space saver spare, which gives you a little bit more peace of mind when you're out in the country. And then closing the boot, it's light, it's easy to do. Now we can jump into the driver's seat and see how the CX-3 performs dynamically. So what's the Mazda CX-3 like to drive? Well, that's a question we've covered quite a few times now on Chasing Cars. We seem to come back to this car maybe once a year, which is appropriate because it continues to be incredibly popular. This size works well. I know when the new CX-30 was revealed and then released here in Australia, a lot of people on the channel commented saying, you know, is that the end of the CX-3? And Mazda said, no, of course not. Why would we give up all those sales for a tiny crossover, which is what they get out of this car? And I guess fair enough. The CX-30 is doing pretty well, but the CX-3 is doing better. So evidently there are people that want a vehicle like this, and you're probably watching now. And the good news for you is that the CX-3 is still a really enjoyable car to drive. It is dating in some ways, and it's not standing up to the competition quite as well as it once did, largely because those cars are closing the gap to the CX-3 and in some ways overtaking it. But there are other things that are still really joyful and really kind of charming about this car, and they mainly come down to handling, because Mazda have made this kind of like the sports car of affordable small SUVs. It has great steering, it has a great chassis. You know, it's surprisingly fun to drive for a car of this type. When you find a country road, you just kind of want to keep pushing on in the CX-3. Most rivals encourage you to back off because they're not that fun or capable, but the CX-3, you know, you kind of get the sense that it has sort of the heart of an MX-5 underneath it, where it just wants to go harder and harder basically, and the chassis is so well sorted that it can do that without making you feel like you're in grave danger. Of course, most of these cars just poodle around the suburbs, and it's fun at that, but really the CX-3 demonstrates its capability best outside the city, which is maybe counterintuitive. Now, if you go for one of the more affordable models on smaller wheels and chunkier tires, it's a good fit, very comfortable car. Here in the Akari that I'm driving, and also the S Touring that sits underneath it in the range, they have these big 18-inch wheels, low profile tires, and if I'm honest, they make the experience in the burbs pretty uncomfortable, especially at the rear end. You see a bump in the road or an expansion joint, and you go to drive through it, and you feel the hit at the front, and then you really feel the hit at the back. And something like the Ford Puma, the Skoda Kamiq, the Volkswagen T-Cross, they all do a better job of just soaking up those bumps. If you're on the big wheels in the CX-3, there's just a constant fidgeting to the ride. So if I was going to buy the car, I would probably go for one of the more affordable models for many reasons, but particularly because the ride quality is just so much better. Of course, you know, the car I'm sitting in here, the Akari all-wheel drive, is over $40,000 drive away, which I think is insane for a vehicle as simple as this. I mean, this isn't a particularly sophisticated car. It doesn't feel like 40 grand's worth, so I would try and save some of your money and accept a lower spec because it's more comfy and it just makes more sense financially, at least to me. Now, all the CX-3s in Australia now have one engine, a 2-litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder petrol, making 110 kilowatts of power and 195 newton meters of torque, and it gets the job done. It's a nice revvy little unit. It doesn't sound as good as it does where it's used in the MX-5 sports car, but there's a bit of a fizz to it, and it pairs really well to the 6-speed torque converter automatic gearbox. You can get a manual as well, which is a lovely little gearbox, but of course almost all of the CX-3s that get sold, at least in this country, are for the auto. At least it's a good auto. Plus there's a sport mode little switch down here for the auto, which is really well tuned and calibrated. Now, refinement wise, It's not particularly quiet, it's not particularly comfy on the 18-inch wheels, nor is it particularly efficient. Fuel use is between 8 and 9 litres per 100 Ks, which for a vehicle as small as this is not ideal. If you're looking for something really frugal and with cheaper running costs, the new Toyota Yaris Cross Hybrid will be what you want, because it's much more economical in the real world. Closer to 4 litres per 100 Ks, you know? So that's a car I would have to test drive if I was shopping in this class. But the CX-3 in a lot of ways still feels very capable, very enjoyable to drive. We have some modern safety tech. We've got adaptive cruise control here. We've got AEB forwards and reverse, which always impresses me. We've got blind spot monitoring, and we have a 360-degree camera to help with parking. So that's a detailed look at the Mazda CX-3 as we move into 2021. As ever, this is a nice little SUV, a good car to drive, one that's good looking as well, but it's kind of lost that really commanding lead over the segment. It's still a car I would definitely test drive and try to drive a deal on, but the Ford Puma is attacking it on driving dynamics, while the Skoda Kamiq has really delivered a sucker punch in terms of standard features, so I'd be looking at those cars as well. Just like pretty much always on the CX-3, it makes most sense towards the bottom of the range. If you're gonna spend 40 grand on a car like this, I'd probably tend to look at the next size up, because you'll get a little more flexibility and you won't lose too many of those special features. Now let me know what you think of the CX-3 down below this video in the comments. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.